All right, they want us to sketch a sine and a cosine graph, or not just sketch them, they actually want us to find the equation for them. For a sine and cosine graph, if there's a max point at pi over 2 comma 3, so let's put that there, and there's the next min point is 5 pi over 4 negative 7, so let's put that down there. So your graph, they said it's a max point there. It's going to do like that, and then it's going to come back up like this. Put that graph up there. So this point is 5 pi over 4 comma negative 7, and this point is pi over 2 comma 3. So I would go to this and go ahead and start making my my intervals. So this is 5 pi over 4. So find out what the distance is here between those two. Find that distance. That's the first thing I would do. So if we find that distance by subtracting 5 pi over 4 minus 2 pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4. So that distance is 3 pi over 4. And remember that said that was one max to the next min, which on a sine or cosine graph is going to be half the period, right? So 3 pi over 4 is half the period. So double that or add another 3 pi over 4. That'll give you your full period, which is 6 pi over 4. 6 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 plus 3 pi over 4 is 6 pi over 4, which is the same as 3 pi over 2. So that's your period.
But wouldn't you add it to 5 pi over 4?
Nope, I'm adding this distance, that distance, which was from the high point to the low point. That distance is half of the period of the graph. So that distance was 3 pi over 4. So add another 3 pi over 4. And you get a total. The period is 3 pi over 2, or 6 pi over 4. So the question now is, what's this point right here? To go over here, which maybe you don't even need this point, but what would that point be? That point would just be whatever 5 pi over 4 plus 3 pi over 4 is. So that's 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi. So this point here is 2 pi, but that wasn't the question. The question is, what's the period? Because the period is what you need. Remember, you need your A, your B, and your C. So your equation is going to be y equals, now notice the cosine graph is the easiest because it's already set up for us. So the next thing we have to figure out is the amplitude. We figured out all the horizontal stuff. Now we got to figure out the amplitude and the vertical shift. So if this up here is 3 and this down here is 7, then that total is 10 divided by 2, and that gives you your A. So let's write our A. A is going to be the total distance from top to bottom divided by 2. So A is 5. Got it? And if A is 5, well, what's the middle of 3 and 7? What's the middle between 3 and negative 7? Negative 2 is going to be the center. So that was our D, right? That's our D. Our D, if we're using the equation, y equals A cosine B. Cosine B. Clean that up a little bit. A cosine B x minus C plus D. Right? D was our vertical shift. So our vertical shift is down 2. Our C, that's our horizontal shift,
is pi over 2.
Is right there. It's pi over 2, right? B is pi over 2. And our C, I'm sorry, that's not our B, that's our C. Our C is pi over 2. And our B, remember B is related to pi. B equals, 2 pi over the period. And our period, we said, was 3 pi over 2. So it's 2 pi over 3 pi over 2, flip and multiply. The pi's cancel, it's 4/3. B is 4/3. So there's all the stuff that we need. So our equation, I'll write it up at the top, is 5 cosine 4/3 of x minus pi over 2 minus 2. And all I did is put those a, b, c, d's in there. Now for the sine, for the sine graph, the only difference on the sine graph is instead of starting at the top, you're going to start right here. And you're going to end right here. So where is that point? Well, it's halfway between these 2 points. That's where it's going to be. So what's the midpoint between those? You add them and divide them by 2.
3.5 pi over 4.
So you add them and divide by 2. So that's going to be 7 pi over 4 divided by 2. 7 pi over 8. That's 7 pi over 8.
Oh, yeah.
7 pi over 8 is that point right there. But also be careful because notice your sine now. See how it's going down? It's starting by going down. So make sure that you make sure you write your sine graph as a negative 5 sine. All these other things are going to be the same. The only thing that's different is that minus 7 pi over 8 minus 2. Those are your 2 equations.